Vietnam, one of the bloodiest, most dangerous wars in U.S. history. Have you ever wondered about the Vietnam War? Well, maybe you've thought to yourself, how long was it? What even caused it? Or maybe you've seen an elderly man wearing a Vietnam hat, or maybe your grandpa was in it. It's important to be educated on the history of our wars because knowing it is shaping the future. So how the war was caused. There was two main reasons why this war was caused. The first reason was an unprovoked attack on two U.S. destroyers, which is like our boats. And it was North Vietnamese who bombed us, and this was located in the Gulf of Tonkin. And this was Vietnamese's boats, and this was the U.S.'s. And the second reason was because North Vietnam wanted to reunite their government with communism, and South Vietnam was trying to fight them from that happening. And it's important to remember, like during that time, before we got into war with them, we were helping them out because we liked their government, we were cool with them, so we'd go give them medical supplies and food and water and just about whatever they needed. So when the war began, it started on November 1st of 1955, before the U.S. was involved. And on March 1965, President Johnson made the decision to send U.S. combat forces into battle. And there was 5,400 men drafted in the first month. And a month later, 5,300 more were drafted. That's a total of 10,700 men in the first 3 months. And there was approximately 2.7 million men in this war. So, on the first day of the war, I'm just going to kind of tell you guys how it went so you guys can get a better understanding. So the first couple weeks, they just settled in. They tried to like look out the area, kind of come up with a plan. And the plan came up with search and destroy, which sounds corny, but it actually worked really well. We used helicopters for mobility, which really helped us a lot. And we used heavy artillery, airstrikes, and firepower. And this is a pic of the Marines when they got to Vietnam and they were walking to their base. And that's the airstrikes we'd use, and those would go bomb. Sounds horrible. Okay. So after we'd bomb them, the ground troops would go in and they'd search for enemies, kind of secure the area, provide medical care for anybody, and we would prepare for attacks because we had to watch our backs because they were really sneaky. They knew what they were doing. So during major battle, this is when things got really rough. The U.S. troops were actually surrounded on all sides. They were in very harsh conditions. They were in the jungle, and when it got dark, like they couldn't even see their hand in front of their face. And most of these men were drafted, so they only had training, so they didn't really, just imagine. So the U.S. Marines were under siege for 77 days, so that means they were like surrounded, they were constantly getting fired at and everything. And the ground division, they faced intense combat as well. And I wanted to show you guys these pictures. This was them when they were in the war, and I thought this one was sad and cool at the same time, but he was counting down the days he got to go home on his hat. So the war lasted from 1955 to 1975. This was a 20-year war. It's one of the longest wars. And the U.S. troops were in Vietnam for 8 years. And over 58,200 men died in this war, and over 303,000 were injured. And there was no winner in this war. People were actually really mad when there was a lot of protests going on at this time, but we ended up withdrawing from the war, and Vietnam ended up becoming a communist government after all. So people were like angry and just mad that they kept sending our men over there to get killed when there was no really reason to keep fighting. So Vietnam vets, they represented 9.7% of their generation, and 61% of them were under 21, and 11,465 were under 20 years old. So when the vets got back, my grandpa actually told me this, that he was spit on. He didn't really talk about it very much, but I did some research, and when they came back home, they were called druggies and baby killers, and they got spit on. A lot of people had mixed emotions. Some people were happy that they were back, but they were looked down upon by a lot of people, and they were not given the support they needed when they got back home. So many vets never told their story. And it's important to remember that Vietnam is not a distant situation or war. It is a crucial part of our history, and it still impacts us today with other countries. So this was actually my grandpa. These are pictures I have from him. He got his like blown off by a tank, but he was handsome. Okay, and here's some wars movies if you guys are interested. This one's my favorite, We Were Soldiers. It's really good. But yeah.